Game time.
Okay.
Let's get going, and I think the first thing we'd like to do is sort of talk a little, go around and make some introductions so everybody knows each other. And we'll start with you, Dan.
I'm Dan Kegel. I live in UNNC territory, but I have a house in GWNC. I'm an engineer and a science fan.
I'm Yolanda Gonzalez, and I'm the representative for Venice Neighborhood Council for LADWP, and I just got the gas company too, so.
Bob Peppermiller from the North Hollywood NC and the East Hollywood NC, and about to retire from the North Hollywood NC. So next month, I'll have only one NC. I'm a property owner.
I'm Asia Jackson with LA Sanitation. I'm in Wastewater Engineering Services Division.
My name is Yoshiko Chinahara. I'm with LADWP and Water Recycling. So me and Asia are going to present to you guys today.
Reggie Gore, DWP, AV Services.
Thomas Martinez, DWP Government Affairs.
Jason Stinnett, DWP Community Affairs.
Leonard
Horowitz, West Hills stakeholder, and Van Nuys stakeholder.
Walter Hall, Greater Valley Glen Council.
Wayne Keith, Palms Newburgh Council.
Fred Pickle, Office of Public Accountability Ratepayer Advocate.
Camden Collins, Office of Public Accountability Ratepayer Advocate.
And Rafael Villegas, LA Water and Power and Water System.
Why don't we do the groundwater replenishment, Yoshi? Easy. I'm not used to seeing you over here. I'm usually,
I know.
We're over at Media Center.
Yes, I am the.
We're just filling in for our Tillman staff.
Yes, I don't even know where everything is in this building. So yes.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for having us. We just introduced ourselves. I'm Yoshi.
I'm Asia.
Hello. All right. And so LADWP and LA Sanitation are partnered on implementing our recycled water program. This morning we're here to present to you guys about the groundwater replenishment project. We were here several years ago to present on it, and the project's morphed since then. We're now having a phased approach as we implement this project. So we want to come out here and talk about the initial phase. And the goal is to turn this project on, the initial phase of this project on this year. So that's why we're here to update you and make sure you have the latest information. All right, so we like to always start by showing where water recycling and where this project fits into our water sustainability goals. So we'll go over those first. Then make sure everyone here understands what we mean when we say groundwater replenishment. That's a very specific term in the water recycling world. Talk about what the initial phase is and the ozone demonstration component of the initial phase, and go over our timeline. So LA's water sustainability goals, if you haven't seen this already, the mayor set some very ambitious goals for us here in the water system. We're working to reduce imported water by 50% by 2025, and to source 50% of our water locally by 2035. So groundwater replenishment is a huge part of meeting these goals.
A quick question: when you talk about local also includes Owens Valley.
Yes, I'm just checking with Rafael Vegas from Water Research.
Right now it still does, but I know there's discussions on whether it should be considered.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, the locally sourced. Actually, the locally sourced refers to in basin.
Okay.
Yeah, and that number, the Green New Deal mayor just released earlier in the week. That number's now 70%.
So even more ambitious goals. Okay.
Look who's here.
You're welcome. Do you want time to introduce people who just
You don't need that, Tony.
Okay.
He needs no introduction.
It's too late.
All right. All right, so this is our water supply pie. I'm sure you guys have seen this before, but right now, recycled water is about 2% of our water supply. Our goal is to increase that. Non-potable reuse, we're referring to irrigation and industrial use. So we want to increase our non-potable reuse from 2% to 7%. And then in addition to that, groundwater replenishment, which is indirect potable reuse, once we start bringing that online, that'll represent 5% of our pie chart for the projected. And this is another number that's going to get updated. It'll be even greater when we start to factor in Hyperion in full. All right, so what do we mean by groundwater replenishment? This is referring to when we take recycled water, we allow it to infiltrate into the ground. As it infiltrates, it undergoes natural treatment in the soil, and we'll keep talking about that during the presentation. And then that water becomes part of our groundwater system, and it travels for a minimum of 2 months, but really even longer, even years before we extract it for drinking. There are groundwater basins all across Los Angeles. For the groundwater replenishment project, we'll be using the San Fernando Valley groundwater basin. You can see it's confined here by the mountains. Down here is the Donald D. Tillman plant, and we'll be spreading water up in the eastern area of the valley. But you can see here there's other groundwater basins in the city. Those come into play when we talk about Hyperion, which we're not getting into today. But the important thing to remember with groundwater basins is these are essentially a way to store water. You need water storage because of how we use and receive water here at the city. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't. You always need to balance your water storage. So this is an important resource for us, and it's even the resource that the city was founded on. All right, so back to groundwater replenishment. So for the Los Angeles Groundwater Replenishment Project, we'll be using recycled water produced by the Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant in Van Nuys. We'll be delivering that water with an existing recycled water pipeline. It's a 10-mile pipeline. It already connects the Donald C. Tillman plant to the Hanson Spreading Grounds in Sun Valley. So there's not going to be any construction of the streets for the initial phase of this project. So that water, as it's already highly treated at Tillman, and Asia here will go over the treatment process there. But once it gets into the spreading grounds and it starts infiltrating into the soil, it undergoes soil aquifer treatment. And that's a natural treatment process. It's part of the water cycle. It's how all water that sinks into the ground gets treated. It's both physical and biological, and it's very powerful. So then by the time that water becomes part of our groundwater supply, it's highly purified. And then, again, we are required by the regulations to have a minimum of 2-month travel time. We actually have years before it reaches our existing extraction wells and becomes part of our drinking water system. And during that time, we monitor this water throughout all the treatment processes, and we monitor it in the ground. All right, so Asia from LA Sanitation is going to talk about treatment at Tillman.
So for at Tillman, we have preliminary treatment that gets out the trash and grit. And we also have primary that gets that helps the solids settle to the bottom. The solids aren't actually treated at Tillman. They continue through the sewer lines and continue down to Hyperion through the sewer pipes. Secondary, we have microbes that then feed on the organic matter, and then we have tertiary that has cloth filters that further refine the particles, and we get to tertiary treated recycled water. So for what we're doing for this ozone project is that we're inserting ozone between the secondary and tertiary treatment. And with ozone, we're further treating the organics and chemicals that are in the processed water. And then after we're putting soil aquifer treatment after tertiary, which, as Yoshi was saying, just going through the natural processes and has the 2-month minimum detention time.
All right. So as Asia was saying, they're treating the water down here at Tillman. And then we already have our existing 54-inch recycled water line to get to Hanson Spreading Grounds. The ozone units that we're discussing, those are going to come and they're going to be basically in a trailer. You're not even going to notice when they're brought into the plant. So they're all modular. Something I want to be clear about when we say ozone demonstration. So for groundwater replenishment, you're not required to add ozone. The tertiary process is fine. That's a process that they've used for over 50 years in LA County for a very similar project. But what we wanted to do for this project was take a step further. So as part of this project, we're demonstrating ozone, demonstrating its potential to further treat the water, and that'll help us with future phases of the project. The way the regulations are written, the more water you put in the ground, the more treatment you may need depending on a number of factors. So we're demonstrating ozone because we believe it's an effective way to treat the water. And you can see Hanson Spreading Grounds over here. If you haven't seen or been to a spreading grounds, they're basically large areas of land that were set aside for stormwater capture. So right now we infiltrate stormwater at these spreading grounds. We've been working to deepen them so we can capture more stormwater, because when it rains it pours. But when it doesn't rain, that's when we can come and use these spreading grounds for recycled water, otherwise they're just sitting there. So this is a great way for us to get our water into the basin, and it's basically free to just let it sink into the ground. All right, so earlier as Ada was talking about, we're adding ozone. So ozone works in combination with soil aquifer treatment. So I mentioned earlier that soil aquifer treatment is both a physical and a biological process. So the physical process, that's like a coffee filter, right? It just takes stuff out. We understand that basic concept, but the biological process is really where the magic's at. There's bacteria that lives on the soil, doesn't travel with the water, it stays on the soil, but as the water passes through that soil, that bacteria starts to eat what's in the soil. It eats whatever's not water, it just starts to, oh, I'm so sorry, that's my phone. That's way in the back there. Sorry. Could you, sorry Tom, if you could just shut it off. It's pleasant though, right? It's just birds. Anyway. So that bacteria will even adapt to eat more things, so it becomes very, very effective. What ozone does is it'll break down large molecules, large organic molecules that bacteria would eat. So the way I like to describe it is, this is like what we're doing with the ozone. It's going to cut the food up before we serve it to the bacteria, and it makes it easier for that bacteria to do its job. And we've been seeing this in studies that we've done in a laboratory setting, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later too. So for the initial phase of the project, our goal is to spread up to 3,500 acre-feet per year of recycled water. So that volume of water represents about 7,000 household customers. 1 acre-foot per year can serve about 2 families for a year. So that's how we get to that number, and that's about 1% of our water supply. So to get to that 5%, we'll be working hard on our future phases to increase that volume. So talking a little bit more about this project, I mentioned earlier that LA County's been doing this for over 50 years. Outside of the city, east of here, in Montebello, they've been recharging recycled water that's tertiary treated, no ozone, since 1962. They've done health studies, they've monitored this water, and it's fine. It's just normal, natural water. So this is not new. It's been done for a very long time. We're really just restoring the water cycle. What is new is we've been testing soil aquifer treatment in the laboratory. You can see these are some soil columns that have been set up. These are 10-foot columns set up in like a 2-story laboratory. They actually run recycled water through these columns so they can measure before and after different constituents. We test for over 200 constituents when we do these kinds of projects. And it is incredible what soil aquifer treatment can do. And we're also doing a comparison with ozone to show how that helps accelerate the process. So we always want to make the point that all of our water that's served by LADWP meets or exceeds drinking water standards. It doesn't matter what process we use, stormwater, recycled water, imported water. Overall, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, why are you doing this? Why don't you just go to the ocean and do desalination? Desalination is much more expensive than what we're doing, on top of having a much bigger carbon footprint. And so with the ozone demonstration, we can also help support additional research and plan our future phases. All right, so timeline for this project. I think the last time we were here was when we were working on our environmental impact report. That was in 2016. So since then, we've been working on further developing the project, dividing it into phases, figuring out the best way to implement. We're planning to begin operations for our initial phase this year. That's pending our Regional Water Quality Control Board permit. So that's going to be the key to getting this online. So we need our permit. And then in the meantime, we're also working on developing our future phases, which will be a combination of bringing more wastewater flows into Tillman and adding additional treatment to meet the regulations. So thank you very much for having us. If you have any questions, please have at it.
How much is this going to cost? I mean, I guess, you know, how much is this going to cost DWP per acre foot?
All right, so the initial phase is great because we're relying on natural treatment, which is free. So with the ozone demonstration, the capital cost of, it's about 12 million for us to build all of this. We're also partnered with LA County Public Works at the spreading grounds. They do maintenance there. It's about $370 per acre foot. So far less than the cost of imported water. It's probably the cheapest water you can get, other than storm water if it rains. So this part's good. It's when you add treatment that things get expensive.
So where are we getting our imported water from?
So we purchase imported water from Metropolitan Water District. Some of it comes from the State Water Project up north from the Delta area. So I know that's in the news a lot. We also get it from the Colorado River. I don't know if there's anything else I should get into, but those are the two main sources.
And the aqueduct.
Well, there's also our own Los Angeles aqueduct that DWP owns.
Is this presentation online?
I don't think this version of it is, but we can put it online.
Or send it to me and I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
You know, if you could
We do
send
have
it.
a fact sheet online that's like a summary of the presentation.
Online, okay, under GWR?
Yeah, on this is our website, ladwp.com/GWR. So we have a fact sheet, but we don't have this presentation up, so.
And as someone who traveled west on Victory Boulevard past the 405 freeway for many years, going to high school there, playing taxi, there's a very offensive smell that comes from in Lake Balboa. Does this ozone treatment, I heard you mention gases, affect the offensive?
So the smell in Lake Balboa is not from the recycled water at Tillman. It's actually because of the fish in Lake Balboa.
This is sewage smell.
It is because of the decay. It's because, I mean, that's
It's the fish and the
and
birds
the
and
decay and the biological smell.
From the lake?
Yeah, from the lake. That lake didn't exist before this plant was put in. They created it as part of our environmental mitigation when they built Tillman, and then they seed it with fish for recreation. And so recycled water by itself doesn't smell, but when you have it in that situation, it doesn't get enough oxygen. You have fish and the biology and the birds. So it comes down to Rec and Parks Management of the lake. Sorry.
The aquifers in the San Fernando Valley have been contaminated because of the Rocketdyne project through the years.
Yeah.
Is this going to flush out and clean as requested by the federal government to clean it up? Is this all part of it, or is this a separate entity? And second question is, what do you do with the byproducts? Where do you ship it? Where do you dump it? If there are byproducts.
Remediation. Okay, so there's two questions. Okay, so the first one was about the contamination in the San Fernando groundwater basin. So how we describe these projects is they have separate utility. So one project, this project, will bring more water into the basin so that we can restore the groundwater levels there, and then the remediation project will clean up that groundwater. That being said, I mean, when you put clean water in, it helps push contaminated water out. So will it help? Yes, that's not the goal of the project. But I mean, the fact is that groundwater storage is the best storage we have. So we have to take advantage of it. And whether or not we do this project, we have to remediate the groundwater basin. We have to get that contamination out.
Then the other one was byproducts.
Okay, and then yes, the other question was on byproducts. So I'm assuming you're thinking more along the terms of brine from reverse osmosis.
That's part of it. I'm also thinking if it's contaminated from percolates and rocket fuel stuff and all that good stuff.
Oh, in the groundwater.
The groundwater, you're bringing in fresh recycled water,
yeah.
right?
So
isn't it going to stay there?
So let me see if I've got this right. So for this initial phase of the project, we're not using reverse osmosis, so there won't be any brine produced. In the future, we may need some reverse osmosis if the regional board determines our salt levels are too high. We did studies to show they're not, but it's not all up to us. So if we do generate any brine from future phases of this project, it'll go back into the sewer and be treated down at Hyperion. As for the remediation process, and Raphael may have more answers than me, but my understanding is they're going to use granular activated carbon. So when you have that system, the contaminants get trapped inside the carbon molecules, and they actually remove the whole set of carbon and bring in a new set. So that's how they physically remove it from the water. So I don't know if you have anything to add.
Right.
But that's what I know about it so far. It's not my project, but.
Yeah, and it's going to be a coordinated effort where DWP is implementing our own treatment facilities to remediate the groundwater, but also working with some of the responsible parties so that they can contain some of their own plumes, and pump minimum amounts to continue to maintain containment. And but overall, whenever you're putting in cleaner water, it does have that flushing effect of the basin, and it is a long-term process. It's not going to be cleaned overnight, so we're talking decades here.
Taking years.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because what we've seen out at Hanson spreading grounds, they don't pump any water at Hanson. They only put in storm water, and that area is free of contamination. And that's just from years of spreading storm water and pushing that plume over. But when you're pulling it out, you start to bring it in that area. So in a way, it's good because it means we know where to go to treat it. All right, in the back. Yeah.
This is for sanitation. Yes. What effect is this going to have over time with the Hyperion plant? Is this going to, are they going to be a big modification to that plant, or if we start taking the water away from the flushing, if you will, what's going to happen out there at Hyperion? Or is that going to, this is all part of the Hyperion also? I mean,
Well, there's, as Yoshi was saying, that there's, we're working on additional projects later on to bring more flows to Tillman, to help offset everything that's going on with putting water into the ground. So to help support and keep the water reclamation plant going at Tillman and LAG. So one of those is East-West Valley Interceptor Sewer to help bring more water to Tillman. But eventually, you are right, there's going to have to be a balance going on at Hyperion. I'm not involved with the Hyperion project directly in any way, so I can't speak for Hyperion, but they are working on behind the scenes of how to meet the mayor's goals of increasing or going to a full reuse.
And if I may add, so the thought is, this is a project that's in the valley. We can get water into the ground a lot quicker than Hyperion. Hyperion is more long-term. You're talking 15 to 20 years out. And over time, the flows in the sewer with population increases are going to continue to increase. So even though they are going to divert water back into Tillman that would otherwise flow to Hyperion, as population growth continues, those flows are going to increase. So you're going to see probably a wash of what you're currently receiving now at Hyperion will probably remain consistent over that time period.
But they're so different, though. I mean, Tillman has a capacity of, I forget what it is.
80 or something.
It has a capacity of 80 FGD. So we're actually...
Yeah, and Hyperion, you're talking about 200,000 acre foot a year.
260.
Or what, I thought it was 195.
Capacity is like,
it's huge. I mean,
It's designed for 450 million gallons a day.
Yes, but it only goes about 250.
About 260 right now.
Million gallons per day.
Million gallons per day, yes. Actually, the gentleman over there had a question.
Yeah, the east-west interceptor, does that change the flow that's going to Hyperion, or is it completely separate?
It is completely separate. So right now, that's not an existing line, but it would send water to Tillman. So that would be an additional flow. Additional solids to Hyperion, yes, also additional flow to help balance that we could provide to GWR or to send to Hyperion.
And where's the flow that you will be sending to Tillman going currently?
Currently, I believe it is. I think it's going to. It's an LAG service area. So instead of it, the sewer lines there go to LA Glendale Water Reclamation Plant. So instead, we're sending it to the top of the system to Donald C. Tillman instead.
I see. Thank you.
Will any of the water from this project be used for the LA River project?
So this initial phase has no relation to the LA River since all that water currently bypasses to Hyperion. The city's committed to maintaining the lakes out there that we brought up earlier, which is Lake Balboa, the Japanese Garden, and the Wildlife Lake. So right now we're not making any changes that would change the LA River project, which I'm not sure what the scope of that project is right now. I hear that changes a lot.
Which project, which LA River project that you?
Where they're gonna be damming it up and saving the water and making, projects along the edges of the LA River for developments.
So when we were looking at, for a long time now, the goal for recycled water out of Tillman was 30,000 acre feet a year of production. And with the declines in the flows in the sewer, we realized that we're not quite going to get to that number. So that's why they're looking at diverting more sewage and so forth. And in order to be able to meet that goal, we're looking at the possibility of possibly redirecting some of the flows from the LA River back into the plant as well. And and looking to see how we do that while still maintaining a balance with the beneficial uses that currently occur. So some of the mitigation that's been discussed is if you're going to reduce the flow, can you create these pockets of ecosystems or habitat that will make up for the reduced flow in the river. So it's one of the things that's being looked at. It's still very early on. We're part of a study right now with the State Water Resources Control Board to look at scenarios for in-stream flow. So what happens to the habitat in the LA River as you begin to run different scenarios of lower flow, and how does that impact not only the beneficial uses, the fish and invertebrates and stuff that support habitat, but also beneficial uses like folks that go in there and they fish or they kayak and so forth. So we're looking at how can you maintain a balance between water supply and the beneficial uses that still occur. So nothing's been determined on that yet. But DWP saw, Glendale filed a 1211 petition, which was a petition to basically increase production of recycled water, which means less water in the river. Glendale did the same thing, and so and we see that there's all these projects along the LA River that might have consumptive uses. So the city of LA is looking at where we're the last ones to the trough, and there's a minimum flow requirements in the river. Then that basically means the city of LA ratepayers are subsidizing the recycled water programs and recreational programs for the region. And so we're looking at trying to get our own 1211 in as well, at least to put our stake in the ground and say anybody that has a future project coming up has to analyze it in the context of the city of LA's future water supply goals as well. Because we think if there's any responsibility to the LA River, that it should be shared by the parties that put water into the river. So it's a complicated issue, it's an ongoing process, and we think they hired the State Water Resources Control Board, hired the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, SQUIRT, out of Costa Mesa to do the study. So they're well-respected scientists there. They're building models and are going to basically tell us what some of those, not only what some of these impacts might be, but also potential mitigation, which is kind of the stuff you mentioned.
What is SQUIRT?
SQUIRT.
Southern California Coastal Water Research Project.
Yeah.
That's a nice.
Yeah, that's alphabet soup right there.
When you're talking about reducing the flow on the LA River, are you talking at high storm levels or at low flow levels?
Low flows.
Okay, so at storm levels is not a problem.
Right.
Are you planning to harvest more of that storm level flow?
So as part of our local water supply goals, there are goals in there to increase stormwater capture, and I used to work in the watershed group, which was responsible for development of those types of projects. And Yoshi mentioned the Hansen spreading grounds, that the bases were recently deepened. So we're also we partnered with LA County to do the same thing at our own Tahunga spreading ground, at their Columbus spreading grounds, their liquid spreading grounds, Brantford Basin, and doing sediment removal behind the McCoyman Dam and the Big Tahunga Dam, so they can capture more water behind there, and then be able to send it downstream in kind of controlled fashion and into the improved spreading grounds. The spreading grounds improvements include new intakes, upgraded intakes, deepening of the basins, widening of the basins, telemetry. Currently, they send folks out there with plywood to go and move water around. So these facilities are over 80 years old. So they've reached sort of the end of their service life, and it's some of the more cheaper investments that we can make to capture stormwater, because you're looking in the range of like $40 an acre foot for a small amount of work for the amount of water that you're going to be capturing. But we've also partnered with sanitation on the more sub-regional types of projects like green streets, galleries under parks, and things like, or even parcel-based like rain gardens for people. So taking like the full range to try and maximize stormwater capture, and they vary in cost, but we look at it in terms of programmatically. If we can capture more stormwater, then that does relieve pressure on the LA River. So.
And the water that gets, the stormwater that ends up in Tillman, is that in the same watershed that feeds the LA River?
Yes,
okay.
But currently the systems are separate. So the storm system is separate from the sewer system, but you do have infiltration that happens when it rains into the sewer system. So you do see increases in flow into the treatment plants during rain events. But they are separate. They are separate systems, but it's part of the same watershed. The LA River. Can you go back to the map that showed the basins?
No, this one further.
Back, the one that showed all the basins. There. So the LA River watershed is basically that boundary along the west, but also increases into the Angeles National Forest to the east and drains into the San Fernando Basin and goes out through the Glendale Narrows, exits through the Glendale Narrows down the LA River out to Long Beach. So that it's the LA River watershed, or upper LA River watershed. It's actually bigger than the city of LA itself.
It's about 1,000 square miles, doesn't it, drain?
Something like that. Yeah.
What's the relationship between DWP and sanitation? How does the money flow?
All right, so for recycled water projects, if the benefit is entirely for water supply and it doesn't actually benefit the treatment or the sewage system, then LADWP is responsible for paying for that project. So for the initial phase, for groundwater replenishment, this only benefits water supply. So it's on LADWP to pay for whatever projects we make. And that's why we look very carefully at our decisions. If it's a project that has multiple benefits, then there may be some cost sharing with LA Sanitation.
But
depending on what
DWP doesn't pay for Tillman.
We don't pay for Tillman because Tillman itself, up to the tertiary stage, exists to relieve the downstream sewers. That's what was the goal of it when they built it in
Did you pay for the pipeline to Hanson?
We paid for the pipeline to Hanson. That was back in the 90s.
And you pay to maintain Hanson?
Yeah, no. Wait, do we pay to maintain Hanson?
When Hanson was upgraded, we did a 50-50 cost share with LA County because their charge is flood control, protection of life and property, and water conservation. So the water conservation component, we're the owners of that water because the city owns the Pueblo rights handed down from the King of Spain like 200 years ago of that water. So you know, when they're looking to upgrade their facilities, their flood dollars compete countywide with all their other facilities, and us looking at accelerating our local water supply goals when there's an infusion of funds from DWP from the water supply perspective, and we do these 50-50 cost shares with them, that then on their portfolio sends these projects top of the list on priority.
Yeah, so we are going to be paying them a very small amount for the increased maintenance that's caused by us putting recycled water in their spraying grounds.
That's what the
they
county,
own and
right?
operate. What?
That's
yeah, that's LA County. So LA County Public Works, we're still negotiating the rate, but it looks like it's going to be about $25 per acre foot. So it's actually a very small amount of cost.
Tony, did you have one?
Actually, I shouldn't have the right to answer that question because I was late. But my basic question is, why are we wasting time with a small plant instead of building a plant that will use every single drop of water except for those minimum amounts of flows we guarantee to the LA River?
So I did see your email. So the answer is we actually are. We have very little water right now at Tillman in addition to that water, and that's because of conservation. So you'll get to see the presentation if you stay for the length meeting, but going to slide on.
I just want to make certain that we have a plan to, because, you know, recycle more.
Yeah, so we do. So right now with the initial phase, this 3,500 acre feet per year that we're working to get a permit for, that's all the remaining water we have. You know, we talked about 2 projects that are part of our future phases. One's the East-West Valley Interceptor Sewer, and the other one's our 1211 petition. So, you know, the beautiful thing about Tillman is we have that 80 MTD capacity that, like you're saying, we're barely using half of that capacity. We can do so much more with the existing plant, the pipeline, the spreading grounds. We should take advantage of that. It's already there. But we don't have the wastewater. So right now, because of how great conservation's been, it has been great. Not for water recycling, but for the city's water supply. So we just don't have the wastewater
And we have
expected.
Bush stealing their sewer water themselves. The brewery is their biggest water customer, I think, and they put in an effluent recycling thing there themselves, and they're not giving us their sewer water anymore.
They're using it.
Well, that's
You're
good.
drinking it.
That's good. That's fun.
I wasn't actually sure if that project got built. I know we were thinking about it.
I'd like to clarify
Tap,
the
yes,
cost.
the other tap.
The burden. Bureau of Sanitation, their part for paying for these things, that's coming from the sewer service charge portion
they're
on
all-
the DWP bill, is it not?
Yes,
That's
they are on
So
the
the
same bill.
ratepayers are paying twice.
No, they're
No,
paying the sewer
you're
part.
paying for different portions. So
Right.
the plant and the tertiary treatment that's currently already happening is coming through the sewer surcharge. Anything in addition to that is coming through the water surcharge. So you are paying for different things, even if it's the same project.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So
It's
but it's not the
burden
same
on
as
the
paying
ratepayer.
twice. You're not paying $2 for something that costs $1. Like you're just paying 2 different agencies $1, $1.
Okay.
It's like
It's
a lot of
complicated.
goes to the same place.
Thank you. I came late too. I just trying to understand, what's the return of investment on this? What's the expectation of spending all this money? What's the final outcome that we can look forward to in the city with all this money being
Matt, I don't know if you're looking for a date, but the cost is half of what it costs us to purchase water, so you're saving
Oh, we're gonna buy
50%.
less water from other districts?
Yes, it means we're
So
buying
how does
less
that
water from
say-
Metropolitan
what's the-
Water District.
What's the expectation of money saved or redirected on this project?
So for this project, for the initial phase, it's $370 per acre foot, and purchase water, I think it's at like $900 per acre foot.
About 1,050.
It's about,
That's for
okay,
tre-
it's
that's for
gone up
treated-
again.
treated water.
For treated water, yeah.
How much is for untreated? 800, 700?
7 something? Yeah, it's about $300 difference.
Yeah, so this is much cheaper water. It's expensive to pump that water over the Hatch piece, and it's gonna get more expensive when they build that pipeline up in Northern California. So,
What pipeline?
Go Gavin.
The one, not the 2, the one.
the single pipeline.
Yeah, he wants it for his wineries too.
Is that it for questions?
All right. Well, I think we have a second round of the same presentation for the next group, so you'll have another chance to ask questions.
Throw darts at you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You look good.
Reggie?
Subfolder DWP.
Reggie, would you mind?
Yes, sir. Is it for this project?
Pardon?
This next or?
Oh, you're gonna be,
Fred has a power flash.
oh, Fred, okay, fine. No problem. Fred, do you have something you want to talk?
Briefly.
Okay.
Or you want to cover something else? Well, you're there, why don't you?
Okay, well, I had a bunch of, I guess, minor things. Excuse me.